I gotta say something weird.
Hi, Amber.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. I saw your text. I ran out for some air.
No, oh, no problem.
Okay. Phew.
I'm testing Facebook Live while Zooming. So I figured rather than having a blank screen, I would have something up for people while we join.
Cool. Yeah,
so I will take this down. Yeah, people are slowly.
Okay, for this one, I actually downloaded it onto my old iPad. So when I look down, so it was okay. Everybody could hear me well and everything on that one?
Yeah. Yeah, it was perfect.
Yeah, there's definitely a delay in your speaking, by the way, now.
Yeah, that's the internet. There's not a whole lot I can do with
okay.
that. I think Zoom is inundated, yeah.
I wish I could have seen the kids, but I think they were engaged.
Yes. It's really, I couldn't get them all on my screen. Well, I had them all on my screen, but it was two separate screens. So I kept like toggling back and forth just to kind of see. And they were all very rapidly paying attention. So that was good. We had some parents involved, even better.
Actually, one of them looked like my old boyfriend. It was the funniest thing when he came up with a little boy. No, no, he had a little girl. It was funny. My high school boyfriend.
All right, here we go.
All right,
Now,
so
join.
how are we going to do this? Okay. Yeah, I put in quite a few slides, but I think it's worth it because it's not all my father speaking, but I will repeat some of those.
Okay.
Because it's a different audience, and it's so good when he tells the story also.
Oh, absolutely. That was fabulous. Hang on just 1 second. Oh, never mind. I lost him. Oh, well.
I always hated that shirt. It's so funny that that's what he wore.
You had mentioned that with the stripes, yeah.
Oh. That was unbelievable when the rabbi started to cry.
This is generally a very emotional day for a lot of people. It doesn't matter how many times I do this, how many years I do it. The candle lighting and the name reading part always just moves me to tears, especially my own family. It's very heart-wrenching.
But it was amazing, you know, with that image that I put up. I'll have to send it to him if you give me his
absolutely.
email.
Hello.
Hello. Hi,
Rabbi Rosenberg here. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, I've never used Zoom before, so here I am.
You are using it. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Okay, I'm going to make peanut butter jelly now. I'll leave this on.
Hello, Rabbi. Thank you in advance.
My pleasure.
Oh, and you got the video working too.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's amazing.
You're doing it.
None of us do. I don't either.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very surreal to have 31 connections with Hebrew school students and their families and Federation people on a little bit earlier.
You did that earlier.
Yeah, we just finished that at 6 o'clock. It worked really, really well. So I will say it, I much prefer doing this face-to-face with people as we have for the last God knows how many years, but in lieu of being able to do that, this is the next best
Well, I
thing.
think you're going to have a huge crowd because I've been working on getting it out to synagogues and everything else. I have some synagogues that are joining us, so
that's wonderful.
Should be good.
It is also, I am just giving everybody a heads up, test running, doing this as a Facebook Live while we Zoom just to see if that works. So I'm like kind of monitoring it on my iPhone while I do all of this. So people are filling in. So this is good.
How many people do you think that you're expecting, just out of curiosity?
Just
how big
from the sign-ups, based on those numbers, we were somewhere close to about 60 people. So.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Rabbi, how many do you think you will have joining?
Do they have to have, when do they sign in?
Hold on.
Well, it was sent out to the membership list of about 4 congregations.
I'm gonna mute it. Mute.
So I don't know, who's going to respond, but it was sent out.
Oh, interesting. I watched some of your lectures yesterday.
Oh, thank you.
I went on your website and I thought it would be a good thing to get to know you just a little bit remotely.
Sure.
Where are you? Where are you located?
Edison, New Jersey.
Oh, that's right. I saw that yesterday. That's right. I'm in the city. So if anybody hears sirens, obviously you'll know why. COVID.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I'm not much different from you. We have Central State Hospital right down the road from me, literally like minutes down the road from me. And that's all you hear all day long is these sirens of ambulances back and forth and
it was
the hospital being over.
There were a few before I did the other presentation, which is why I made a note of it. And then it was incredibly silent, and now it's very silent outside. You know, obviously it depends on which hospital at which moment.
Yeah. Well, my house is not far from Robert Wood and St. Peter's.
This is by Columbia Presbyterian.
Are we going to hear the clapping at 7 o'clock?
You might, but up here,
when they change shifts.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing, and it depends upon which neighborhood you're in as to what you actually hear. In this neighborhood, you hear horns blowing more than anything. That's a very regal chair.
How are you, Leon?
Good. I'm good. I'm just checking we have a million. That's what I'm counting.
Oh boy, let me tell you, a million plus.
It's always automatic. As soon as you put that on, we got the million.
Yeah.
We're doing great. We're doing great.
I had a cousin who died the other day, and I know probably I shouldn't do that by myself, but I didn't know what to do, so I just said Kaddish by myself for him.
I think that's happening a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's sad. It's I've lost one cousin, another is on a ventilator. A friend passed away. It'll be 3 weeks ago on Monday, next Monday, and a friend of another cousin. So, and then another person was found. So it's 4 so far.
My goodness.
I'm doing the funerals, and it's so somber. There's only 3 or 4 or 5 people there.
Oh.
Dessert?
Yeah.
Cindy, what is your background there, Cindy? Which body of water is that?
It's the Dead Sea.
Ah.
The Dead Sea.
That was
I figured
clever.
since I was there, I put it on today as my background.
That's fabulous. We got the Dead Sea. We got Glenn with the Israeli flag going on. We're definitely in the right spirit today.
It's so fascinating to see everybody's home and libraries, and especially like the newscasters, and it's so interesting.
Yeah, not something I ever thought we would do. I mean, I'm in my dining room because it's the only place I had enough room to kind of like spread everything out.
I'm in my bedroom with 2 paintings of mine that I've not yet unwrapped. I kind of like them with the ceramic on them. It's so bizarre. But actually they have to do with one is a Syrian rebel fighter and his baby. The other one is after Sandy Hook, and there's the third one of Malala, and they're magnetic paintings.
Wow.
She's just gonna listen.
Imbar, you hear me?
I hear you.
Very good. We're good. Okay.
Very cool.
Okay.
We got a steady stream of people joining in, so. Afraid the squares are going to start getting smaller and smaller.
Hello, I see. Hello.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, hi, Rabbi Rosenberg. How are you?
How are you?
Very good. How are you doing?
I miss seeing you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing. We used to eat lunch together all the time.
Yeah. He's the nicest rabbi, I got to tell you guys.
Thank you.
Hi, Ron and Linda. Hi, Leon.
Hello,
It's good to see you.
It's like the biggest family reunion ever.
I guess I should make this smaller. Or does it go smaller? Yeah, I have to make it smaller, right? Yes.
It'll, I think, eventually shrink down as we.
I'm going to mess something up. Okay.
Are moving on to screen number 2 at this point. Yep.
Oh, I have to the same photograph of you guys. Oh.
Is Sylvia on?
Here I am. There's a square that says she is. Did you hear me?
Oh. Yeah.
We hear you.
We heard you.
We hear you.
We hear you.
You do have your videos enabled. If you could turn them on, we'd really appreciate it. It makes it a little bit easier to speak to faces as opposed to black screens. If you're just on a call, then don't worry about it. But if you do have working video, that would be really helpful if we could see everybody.
Inbar, you're not my problem.
I am fully aware of your problem. You're the exception.
Thank you, thank you.
I know that you can see us though, so that's okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's good to be unique, you know, but okay.
What just fell? Nothing? Okay.
Judy.
Hey, how are you?
Hi. Oh my God. That's amazing. How are you?
I'm good.
Oh, good. So, will you join in at some point and help me tell the story? This is Judy Zeichner Inbar. This is the person whose father had kept the photograph of my father in his special box for the rest of his life.
Oh my God, absolutely, yes. I just had Nina tell that story to my Hebrew school kids a little while ago. It was one of my favorite parts of the book too. So that's fantastic. Welcome. It's so nice to have you.
Judy, I'm so up. You asked? That's 7 o'clock. That's the noise. Judy, it's wonderful to see your face.
She's in New York. Oh, New York is? Oh, yeah. They do it.
We're going to give it another minute.
Maybe she had it.
It's really great. This will bring this entire thing to life with Judy Zeichner. Oh boy, I'm so excited I can hardly contain myself.
No, it's just the emails. Pleasure. Messages.
Oh, you look wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I decided that I was going to come out of confinement looking better than when I went in, if I could possibly do it.
You did.
Yeah.
I need of a haircut and the color.
I don't know how. I mean, the haircut actually is from when I was doing research in Europe in January, so it lasted.
Well, that's good.
Okay. All right, it is 7 o'clock. So as promised, we are going to be punctual with this because I want to get to everything we need to do today. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us as Perrineville Jewish Center hosts its annual Yom Hashoah program. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Inbar Robbins, and I have the incredible pleasure of being the Education and Program Director here at PJC, and also the granddaughter of an Auschwitz survivor. I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories, and with it, hearing the anguish of losing her mother, 2 sisters, and 2 nephews. Every year, the Yom Hashoah program is my small way of continuing her legacy to make sure her family's stories, their names, and that of the 6 million Jews lost for the sake of being Jewish are never forgotten. Never forget is my oath, never again is my promise. So I want to now just direct you really quickly. I'm going to share my screen for a quick video that will introduce you to our opening speaker. Just give me 1 second here.
see faces of real people? It's like you don't want to look.
See my part. I have a part before.
Apologize, it's a little bit laggy.
Just sit over here.
Well, they saw me. You see, everybody's so.
Oh, sometimes was it this? Oh, here it is. I thought it disappeared, but I think they.
1 second here.
Hi.
Awesome.
What's it eating?
Fortunately, it's very, very laggy with the number of people on the internet at the moment. Is it frozen? Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Unfortunately, the video is lagging greatly at this time. Let me check really quick over here and see. Nope, it's still going. My apologies. I don't want to leave everybody hanging here. Okay. I'll see if I can get it back up at some point. But it was going to just be a quick video that was done by Rabbi Dr. Bernhard Rosenberg, who is with us tonight. He is the Rabbi Emeritus at Congregation Beth El in Edison, New Jersey. He has taught Holocaust and Genocide Studies, graduate courses at Rutgers University, and Communications and Public Speaking at Yeshiva University and Rutgers. He has received the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Humanitarian Award, the Chaplain Award of the Year from the New York Board of Rabbis for his efforts during and following 9/11, and was presented with the annual Rabbi Israel Maushowitz Award by the New York Board of Rabbis. He appears frequently on radio and TV and has published hundreds of articles regarding the Holocaust. It is my honor to welcome our opening speaker tonight, Dr. Rabbi Bernhard Rosenberg.
Thank you for inviting me. Inbar, you have done an impossible job. I've never been on Zoom, so this should be exciting, but you're going to have obviously technical difficulties, but that's to be understood. The prayer that I'm going to begin with is the one that the chief rabbis of Israel began with just the other day. Hundreds of thousands died. Millions have fallen sick. Save, we beseech you, O Lord. We entreat thee, O Lord, send prosperity. Send complete recovery to the sick. Avert the plague from your world, they prayed. Please, O God, who has nourished us, give us food in this famine and provide us with plenty. You asked me to speak briefly about what is occurring today with this horrible virus, where many of our friends have died and are dying. And I'll just begin by saying I'm against any comparisons to the Shoah, to the Holocaust, but I did write this, and perhaps you'll find it interesting. For those of us who are children of Holocaust survivors, we all know, and also grandchildren, the hell that our parents and grandparents went to just to survive. They had no food, they had no clothes, they had no medical attention, they had no toilet paper. They were cramped in hiding places with no fresh air and couldn't make a sound, or the Nazis would kill them. It lasted a lot longer than this will last. Some, like my father, who was at Auschwitz for 4 or 5 years, and my mother, who was at Skarżysko, they lost their education, they lost their souls, they lost their youth. There were no supermarkets, no phones, no radios, no outside interference. I would really be very happy if the media would stop scaring us to death, which leads to only more fear and more panic. Just tell us what to do. Don't give us any choices. During the Shoah, there were the weak and the strong, the young and the elderly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Some shared and others did not. So my request to all of you, and I hope you will watch my film later on today, there are people literally starving to death. They are in lines trying to get food. Unbelievable. Here in the United States of America, people cannot get enough food for a day. So I ask you, help them to get food. There are people who are dying because they cannot get the plasma that they need. It's interesting to note, Lakewood has been criticized lately, but I want to tell you that 1,000 parts of plasma were given by the Lakewood students and shipped over to various hospitals. What a great mitzvah. So I ask you, the Shoah, never forget, never forget. But today we have to act to try to save people. So that is my prayer. Let us together act to save people. I'm deeply honored to be on. I've spoken in your show a number of times. It's a fantastic show. Rabbi Shelley is the kindest, noblest rabbi that I know. And God willing, we will get through this just like we got through the Shoah. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Before we begin today's candle lighting and name reading, I want to call upon Rabbi Jacobs to read a prayer for Yom HaShoah. Rabbi?
Okay, I should have cleared my throat before I hit the unmute button, but here we go. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
A prayer for Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. This is a prayer that originally written by Rabbi David Katz. Ribono shel olam, Master of the Universe. On this most solemn of occasions, we open our hearts, minds, and souls to you as we remember the 6 million, the 11 million, the indifference, and the evil. As we honor the heroes, the martyrs, the survivors, and the victims, we ask you to soothe our souls, to amplify our memories, to strengthen our resolve, and to hear our prayers. We ask for your presence in our midst, for healing, light, and love, to soothe and ease our pain as we commemorate the horrors that were committed not long ago. Please, O Holy One, be gentle with our souls. We ask that you help us to forever remember the stories we hear, as tales of the atrocities are shared, as we re-encounter the unthinkable. We ask that these memories be strengthened and never fade, in the hope that those who remember the mistakes of the past will not repeat them. Please, O Holy One, amplify our ability to remember. We ask that you strengthen our will, that you help us to ensure that the world does not again see such monstrosities. We say never again, and we dedicate ourselves to this principle, to the idea that justice does not allow persecution, that genocide shall not be repeated, and that vigilance is the responsibility of freedom at all costs. Please, O Holy One, make manifest our resolve that these horrors remain but memories. We ask that you answer our prayers. We pray that the call of evil falls on deaf ears, that those who fight for freedom and justice always prevail, that those who need protection do not become victims. We pray that the lessons we learn from this darkest hour allow all humankind to better itself and to truly and nobly embody the idea that we are each made in your image. We pray for the souls of the millions and millions of victims of this brutality. We pray that we honor their lives and their memory by observing this day and by doing everything in our power and beyond to make sure that no such shadow again darkens our world. Above all, we pray for shalom, for wholeness and peace to be in our midst now and forever. Please, O Holy One, answer our praise and prayers, and bring us a world devoid of hatred, filled instead with peace. Can you hear Ratzon? May this be God's will, and may we all say together, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm now going to begin the candle lighting ceremony. For those of you who have been to our programs in the past, you know that usually the Bima has a candle that represents every family whose name was given to me for today. Due to the constraints of video streaming, I'm going to just use one today to represent everybody. And I will begin reading those names. For the Resnick family, Jean Yanka Geller passed away March 2020 at the age of 97. Her sister Fega, who survived but is deceased, and the rest of her family, mother Toby Wallerstein, father Eli Malech, sisters Glike, Sarah, Leigh, Odell Rodzinka, and brother David Rodzinka, who perished in the Holocaust. For the Glansberg family, David, Malka, Chaya, Carol, Cyril, Razel, Labish, Meir, Moishe, and Sender Morgenthaler perished in Treblinka. Yehuda, Chaya, Leah, and Shmuel Langer perished in Poland. Rose and Mordechai Morgenthaler, survivors. For the Hetherington family, Hannah Magram and Benjamin Magram. Benjamin never made it to the camps. He was also shot along with his family in their home. For the Kahan family, Helen Kahan, survivor of Auschwitz, who will turn 97 next month. For Lori Fidus, Lionel Roth. For my family, Malvina Kolb Weiss, Elizabeth Weiss, Abigail Weiss Freund, David Julius Weiss, Julius Arpad Freund, Gaston Auschwitz, Bushke Weiss, Imre Weiss, Joja Weiss Freund, and Malka Weiss Lovi, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen survivors, all of whom have since passed. For the Namkin family, Faye, Leo, and Miriam Namkin, survivors. For the Smolin family, Cyrila Golda Pal, Auschwitz, Yosef Pal, Auschwitz, Shmuel Pal, Grossrosen, Ruchla Pal, Lodz Ghetto, Louisa Pal, Chelmno, Salma Pal, Mauthausen, Sala Pal, Auschwitz, Nachman Pal, Auschwitz, Deborah Pal, Auschwitz, Machel Halprin, Auschwitz, Bajla Blima Halprin, Lodz Ghetto, Eliash Halprin, unknown, Sarah Halprin, Auschwitz, Lyre Hirsch Halprin, Auschwitz. For Aaron Kromalchik family, Jacob Kromalchik, grandfather, Bella Zeligman, born Kromalchik, aunt, Bella Goldberg, born Krochmalnik, aunt, and Raiwa, grandmother, Krochmalnik, born Zeligman, killed in Auschwitz. Stutthof and Ghetto Warsaw and Ghetto Lodz. Jente Goldberg, 3-year-old daughter of Bella Goldberg, Krochmalnik, cousin, Auschwitz. Esther Lerman and her kids, great aunt, and Yachad Lerman Belzek, Matla Sprinze Lerman, and Shmuel Lerman Tashkent. For Sammy Stegman family, Uncle David Stegman and Aunt Fanny Stegman, Auschwitz. For Esther, Shmuel Zelig ben Avraham survived slave labor camps, passed 23 years ago. Sarah Bat Benjamin survived slave labor camps, passed 3 years ago. And in the last several years, we have added those who have been victims of terror over the last several years. In the memory of those who perished in the attacks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Melvin Wax, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Jerry Rabinowitz, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Daniel Stein, Joyce Feinberg, Irvin Younger. In memory and in honor of those who perished and were injured in the attacks in Poway, California, Lori Gilbert Kay, Rabbi Israel Goldstein, Almog Peretz, Noya Dahan, Joseph Newman, 72, brutally attacked with a machete while celebrating Hanukkah at his rabbi's home in Monsey, New York in December 2019. He passed away from his injuries on March 30th, 2020, and to all who succumbed to modern day anti-Semitic attacks. And finally, in memory of the 6 million Jews who perished at the hands of the Nazis, and in honor of all those who survived. I want to call now upon Rabbi Shvelowitz to say a few words and lead us all in the Mourner's Kaddish. Rabbi? You're on mute.
First, I'd like to thank everyone for attending here this evening. I think it's an honor and a privilege. I'd like to especially thank my colleague, Rabbi Bernhard Rosenberg, for taking time to help us with this wonderful undertaking for commemoration of the Holocaust. About 5-6 hours ago, I was at the Primeval Cemetery doing a funeral service for a 70-year or so member here, Magda Wolkowitz, who survived the Holocaust. It was amazing that the coincidence of, well, first of all, reaching the age of 94, rest in peace, but to have her passing and commemoration of her passing on Holocaust Memorial Day. And I was, of course, because of the restrictions, we were very few people, limited to the immediate children and grandchildren. One of the children told me that when they were up here living off Sweetman's Lane for the many years that they lived here, they were confronted by many different types of people. Mostly were farmers, egg farmers. And that he told me that no matter what my mother went through, she always had a special place and a heart for everyone. She did not hate. She helped everyone, no matter what the race was, no matter what the religion was. And I think that's really the lesson Rabbi Rosenberg spoke about today, what we're going through. So many countless faces. I mean, if you look at the number on television, or if you look at the number in the newspapers, it's amazing. It's amazing. 34,000 here, 52,000 here. These are human beings, all with lives, all with souls, and all who have passed. So I'm going to say a Kaddish, not only for all the martyrs and memorializing all the martyrs that we have lost as a nation, but I really would like to include in my thoughts, at least today, those who have passed for this horrible, horrible virus. No matter what their faith, no matter what their color, no matter what their size, no matter what, they certainly deserve a prayer of sanctification. And so please join me, if you can, if you want to mute it or say it with me, in the reciting of the Mourner's Kaddish. Thank you. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei rabbah, v'yomah divrach Yerusei v'yamlich malchusei, v'chayechon u'v'yamechon v'chayei dechol beis Yisrael, ba'golah u'v'zman koriv v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach li'olam u'lomei omaya. Yisparach v'yishtabach v'yispa'ar v'yisromam v'yisnasei, v'yishadar v'yishaleh v'yishalal, shemei v'kudisha barichu, la'ela min kol berchasa v'shirasa v'shbechasa v'nechamasa, da'amiran b'yoma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba mitshemaya, v'chaim oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav, hu ya'aseh shalom oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. May all the souls rest in peace. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I'm now going to introduce you to our guest speaker. Nina has written a book entitled Someday You Will Understand, My Father's Private World War II. The memoir highlights her father's escape from Nazi-occupied Europe with his family at 15, his arrival to New York in 1941, just before Pearl Harbor, and journey as a refugee student at the Dwight School. Soon after graduation, he was drafted by the US Army, returning to Europe 2 weeks after the death of President Roosevelt as part of an elite unit made up of refugees from war-torn Europe called the Ritchie Boys. Having reversed his role as a young Jew on the run in Europe, he occupied a position of authority in the US Army Intelligence Corps, and he went from being persecuted to prosecuting his oppressors. It is my esteemed pleasure to introduce to you all Nina Wolff.
Hi, everybody. Someday You Will Understand, My Father's Private World War II is based entirely upon over 1,000 pages of my father's letters and the testimony he gave to Steven Spielberg of the USC Shoah Foundation and a lot of in-depth research to bring the background of the story to life. Hold on, I just want to share this screen. Can you all see the screen? Or not yet?
Oh, we can see it. I can see it.
Yeah, we see it.
I can see it too.
Photograph.
It's visible.
It's really a coming-of-age adventure story of an unusual young survivor who crossed enemy lines to escape the Holocaust. It's about a young man who entered the US Army as a stateless alien recruit, as a refugee who promoted himself until he became a multilingual OSS interrogator who carried on a one-man war against his SS adversaries by vetting and interrogating Italian fascisti and Nazi war criminals from the masses. His victims went straight to Nuremberg, and he chose rule of law over violence. Horrified by the extent of the Nazi genocide and the condition of the survivors, he stepped in to help by lobbying extensively with Jewish relief agencies, appealing to family, friends, and ultimately writing a letter to Eleanor Roosevelt, pleading with her to intervene on their behalf. Many were still living in concentration camp conditions, sometimes alongside Nazi war criminals. My father was born in Koblenz, Germany in 1924. And when he was a little boy, he was educated in Switzerland as the Nuremberg laws were put into action. They were a family of wine merchants and they were fairly well-to-do. So my grandfather and grandmother sent my father and my aunt to Switzerland for their studies. And they escaped from Germany to Luxembourg and then to Belgium. You can all see the slide that I'm showing of this massive building. This is Brussels. This is Rue de la Loi, which is, and it's a massive building called the Residence Palace. Eventually, the children were brought back from Brussels and brought back to Brussels. And at that point, they lived in this building, which was a very luxurious building with all of the amenities that you could possibly imagine. This is important to say, not to prove that they were a wealthy family, but to show you what can and did happen even to wealthy families, and what specifically the story of this building and why it's so important. And it has become a second passion and hopefully will become a second book. My father made his way through war-torn Europe, acting upon his responsibility to protect the surviving remnant. But before he did so, he was just a kid. And this is what he looked like before they ran from Brussels 4 days before the Nazis bombed. At that point, this is a photograph of my father and my aunt from the police records that I was able to find this past October when I was in Brussels doing research. It shows that if they stayed in Belgium and were caught anywhere near by any police after the 28th of September, 1939, that they would be sent over the border and back to Germany. Nothing was safe, no matter where you lived. There were 250 documents, almost like a Stasi file, kept on my family at that point. My grandfather had to leave Germany. This is a police warrant for his arrest, stating that he put too much water in the wine, too much sugar in the water to make the wine. It's all fabricated. My father made his way through war-torn Europe. As I said, he acted upon his responsibility to protect the surviving remnant once he was in the American army. 1938 was the pivotal year before the start of World War II, when increasing marginalization and virulent persecution of German Jews fleeing Hitler was becoming a burden to the Belgian economy. Belgium was still recuperating from the first German occupation during World War I and the financial instability of the interwar period. By then, somewhere between 450 to 900,000 people were stripped of their citizenship by Nazi Germany's anti-Jewish legislation imposed by the Nuremberg laws. For the first time in history, Jews were persecuted not for their religion, but for their cultural heritage, solely because they were Jewish. After Kristallnacht, any undocumented refugees stopped at the German border were sent directly to concentration camps. The chaos at the border between Germany and Belgium was unprecedented. Jews were fleeing en masse. As a neutral country, they were more protective of incoming refugees than other liberal European governments. All refugees had to report to the immigration police. And that is what this comes from, that file. In October of last year, I was privileged to begin research on a new project and went through over 250 pages on my family alone. My responsibility is to never forget. My mandate is to bring his story forward by building the greatest monument I can to commemorate the Holocaust. What I found was absolutely hair-raising in those files. Jewish refugees were seen as troublemakers, undesirable competitors, and intruders. Among the migrants vying for safety and residency in Belgium was my family. It was against the law for the migrants to earn an income or overstay their welcome. They risked certain deportation if caught. My father was 14 at that point. His police records show that if he was caught anywhere on Belgian territory after a certain date, he would be taken into police custody and forcibly taken across the border. The Wolff dossiers are filled with desperate pleas for intervention written by high-ranking politicians, members of the Belgian Senate, and aristocrats. This was highly, highly unusual, highly unusual. The building that they fled from was eventually taken over by the German army and Luftwaffe because it was the largest building in Western Europe at the time. In October and again in January, I went back to Belgium and I found definitive proof that this building was taken over. Page after page in this ledger, this huge ledger, stated that the stores and the real estate, the apartments, the restaurant, garage, theater, a swimming pool, and every part of this building that you saw was taken over by the Nazis and later, eventually after the war, by the Allied forces. And this will become very important to the story and has become a lifeline to my future research. What you're looking at has never, ever been seen in any history book, ever. I'm the person that came across it, that found it. And it's an inventory that was found when this building was renovated, which I will get to later. It's called the Résidence Palace. And these are photographs taken after the war and what it looked like and the condition it was left in. This is a bombed out communications center that was built by the German army. Again, these have never been seen before. When I was writing my book, the only information I could find on this building was in Wikipedia. And so I was forced to quote Wikipedia, but something continued to bother me over the past decade. And I continued to research until I finally found 150 feet of boxes that had never been seen before. And so you are actually the first public people to see this. The other only thing that I could find, believe it or not, as proof that the German army was in this building, I found on eBay. It's for sale on eBay. This belongs in a museum somewhere, and hopefully someday it will be. This is a caricature strangely dated on my birthday, June 19th, but in 1943 or 44. And it talks about the great times that were had at the Residence Palace while the Germans took over. If you were to look closely, it's very hard to blow this up so that you can see it. These are caricatures of soldiers hanging out and doing what they were doing in that building. It was the most luxurious building in Western Europe, the biggest building at the time, biggest apartment building. So my father fled on May 6th, 1940 with his sister, with his parents and an American friend. And they were in Dunkirk having dinner when the first bombs fell. They left May 6th, the first bombs fell May 10th when the Germans occupied Belgium and northern France for the second time in the early part of that century. They had occupied them during World War I. And their escape route, they went through northern France, all the way down through Lyon and Vichy, and Vichy to Marseille, over to Spain. And finally, they arrived in the United States on September 12th of 1941. And I never understood any of this. But when I heard my father crying, when I was finally in touch with him on September 12th of 2001, it struck a chord. I'd never heard my father cry like that since my grandmother died. And now I know why. One second, I'm sorry. Okay. So now I would like to have my father tell you a little bit from in his own words of what happened.
Times had already become dangerous. We fled from Brussels. We left when the German armies were approaching Brussels. We were in Dunkirk at the time of the first bombardment in a restaurant having dinner. We took the coastal road in the direction roughly, well, it was Normandy, you know. There was already chaos. There was no more border control. The French police took us off the road. They said the enemy was near. All civilians off the road, and that was that. Within an hour or so of that border, the firing started around us. There was a small French troop behind us. Luckily, we didn't get hurt. Some people did. We were under our car. And of course, you know the end of it. The French lost. They had a very small group there and surrendered. So now we were in enemy territory.
What's absolutely amazing about that is that in the fog of war, and I've only experienced one day of that, which was September 11th, 2001. And I know that all I could see was what was in front of my face. You don't really see anything. Several years ago, I was watching television with my son, Jacob, and we happened to turn on the History Channel. And this is a clip from the documentary about what my father just said was a small attack when they hid under their car. One of the things that you'll notice in this tiny little clip, and they're in northern France, this is right before they arrive at a chateau that they will spend 6 weeks in. What you'll notice, I hope, is not only is the troop movement, and this tiny clip shows you that escape was very slow and that people were moving in 2 different directions. We think of escape as something running and quick.
And at midnight, a battalion of the 2nd Panzer Division reached the coast at Noyon. The Germans had split the Allied front in 2. Everything now depended on whether they could defend this long, thin corridor or whether the Allies could successfully counterattack.
I thought that was absolutely remarkable because until that moment, I had learned only from the Shoah video about this and from my mother and a little tiny tidbit from my father about them being under the car. And to have seen this clip and to have researched it and found out that it was Guderian's push for the English Channel, and that was why my father was under his car with the American friend who trained my father and my aunt to be consummate Americans, which I believe was my father's training in intelligence for later, because they spoke English with accents, but somehow the Germans, who, as you will see, also occupied the first place they ran to and lived in for 6 weeks. They ran from a place that became headquarters to a place that became headquarters. This is the chateau that they lived in. I went there, and the road right behind here, it's a tiny, tiny little road, and there's a farmhouse. The first night they stayed in the farmhouse, and I'm just about positive that one of them woke up in the morning, stretched, turned their head and saw the field behind this building and went, oh, wow, let's look at this. And they wound up living here.
That is the chateau in Noyelles-sur-Mer, where we stayed for 5 or 6 weeks during the war. That's where I almost got killed when I was picking strawberries. And a British bomb hit, but didn't explode. We stayed in the tower on the left on the upper floor. The rest of it was occupied by the Germans that used it as their headquarters and dormitory.
When I went, I'd asked if there was anybody who could remember anything, if they could meet with me. It's now a hotel. And I stayed there for a few days, and I was very honored to have lunch with the gardener's grandson, who was an old man by then. I don't know if he's still alive, but we walked out into the garden after lunch, which is right here. My father was obsessed with picking berries his entire life. And I asked him about that incident. And at the same time, there was a German soldier who had a crush on my aunt, who was a famous actor. We never found out whom. And my family had left a Bible in their car of all the crazy things. They destroyed everything. And either my aunt or my grandmother, possibly my grandfather, but I doubt it, left a Bible in the car. A soldier found it and gave it to that officer, who confronted my aunt and said, I know who you are, but I'm not that type of person. Well, 1 out of 10 bombs exploded, did not explode, excuse me. And when my father landed in the crater of the bomb that he just spoke about that didn't explode, the other bomb did explode and blew up that officer. And the gardener's son pointed to the exact spots where that happened and showed me where the soldier was temporarily buried, and where that patch of strawberries once stood. Absolutely amazing. So now my father's going to tell you another little tidbit.
We went to the cellar almost every night.
Boys will be boys.
There was an amusing incident there in the beginning. I noticed that the French people had bottles of oil in wine bottles, but they were labeled huile. And then they had wine bottles, and I thought the Germans were drinking like crazy when they went in the cellar. I mixed the oil and the wine bottles, and I thought that was a funny thing to do. I had several victims. I mean, they wouldn't even take a corkscrew. They broke the head of the bottle and guzzled it.
I added this because, especially when I speak to kids who are not always interested in history, that it brings a certain level of reality of that boys will still be boys, even in the worst of circumstances, and will take chances. I've been in that cellar. It's very small and the racks are still there, which, you know, really brings the story home. But the fact that in my father's late 70s, he could still have a smile on his face after all the things he saw. He was bombed and shot at and almost blew up as a boy. I find that coping mechanism something that I think about a lot, especially because I've been through a great deal in the past several years, and it's like a pocket of peace. And I really appreciate that about my father. So after they were discovered, they had to leave immediately. They painted USA all over their car, and they went from Noyelles to Moulins, and Moulins was the border. And sometimes the border was open and sometimes it would close for 2 weeks at a time. So they luckily got through that, and they pulled into Vichy, and the French thought that they were the Americans coming to save them.
When it came time to leave, we had to get gasoline. We found a way of going to abandoned cars with little rubber tubes and any kind of bottle, and we would suck on the rubber tube till the gasoline came up and started the flow of it, and we would fill bottles and empty them into the tank. We finally got to the demarcation line. Oh, by that time we had USA written all over the car in white letters, big white letters on each door, USA, and on the roof. And my mother had made a little flag out of rags, resembling a United States flag, because that's not an easy one to make. And we were flying that little flag on the aerial.
Eventually, as I said, they made their way down through Vichy to Lyon, where they stayed for 6 months. And my father became part of the resistance. Mr. Kresser, their American friend, eventually went his own way, but he knew the head of the resistance there and introduced my father. And Mr. Kresser had been an intelligence officer in World War I. We've never known whether he was my grandmother's lover or whether he was gay, but this is the constant discussion in my family. The most important thing is that this man saved my family's life, and I would not be sitting here if it wasn't for that. Eventually, they arrived to Cadiz, Spain, which is across the bay from Portugal. And they were able to secure visas, and they were able to secure a cabin on this ship that, if you really look at it, it looks like a slave ship. There were 1,200 people on it, and people died. There were 2 oxen, women were pregnant, babies were had. And I've since met one person, Victor Bromberg, who is a professor at Princeton, who was also on this ship. It's an incredible story. And here's my father telling you about another tidbit that I knew growing up, but there's much more to that story.
From Marseille, we went by train through Madrid to Sevilla, where we caught a freighter called Navemar. By bribing members of the crew, my father got a cabin. The trip took, I think, more than a month. It went to Bermuda, where we just had a day's stop. I guess the ship needed to reprovision. I got off the ship. I was the only one that got off there, because I noticed that the British troops were wearing white shorts and long socks and white shirts, and I had white shirts and white shorts and long socks. So I dressed up like that and snuck off the ship to buy oranges, which was something we badly needed. The food on the ship was atrocious. And anyway, we got to New York in September of 1941, just before the outbreak of the war in December.
It is amazing what these people lived through. And he had his 17th birthday on this ship. Professor Victor Bromberg was, I think, probably a year older than my father, and he and his friends on this ship, if you can believe that they made friends, became the vigilante group and sort of the police of the ship to keep everybody, you know, just in order. This is a photograph of either from Time magazine, oh, it's from the New York Times, of this ship arriving. It does not show my family, but it took 1,200, there were no more typewriters to write visas in Portugal. And this ship almost never made it out of port. But nobody would get off this ship because it was surely going to be their death. The Gestapo was all over the place. So this was an absolute miracle. Eventually, my father became an intelligence officer. He was drafted into the American Army. And from the moment he left, he wrote letters home, the way we text and email. To, as I said, about 700 letters, and that's a couple of thousand pages of paper, because they're all, most of them are handwritten. There are some that are typewritten. And he worked his way up to being an intelligence officer. So he entered the Army Memorial Day of 1943, when the last soldier from the Civil War was marching up the West Side.
We found quite a number of them, hiding, as we had been told to expect, as supply sergeants and so on. And enemy officers were the best source of information. Some of these German career officers had a total hatred, almost as good as mine, for these people.
So he made his way through, he started in Italy when he left Washington as a Ritchie boy, which was the precursor to the OSS and the CIA. And he was trained to vet out war criminals. And he left 2 weeks after Roosevelt died. And his first job when he arrived back to Europe was to go through Mussolini's documents and translate part of the order of surrender of the German army. And all the way through, he wrote on all sorts of stationery. But more than anything in the world, all he wanted was to go home again. All he wanted, like any refugee, probably was to go home and see if there was anything left. And on December 25th, of 1945, after 5.5 years of exile, he returned to Brussels. Having left as a 15.5-year-old boy, he returned as a 21-year-old American intelligence officer. And like many young refugees and survivors, all he wanted was to see his home again. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having a technical difficulty. Bear with me for a second. He arrived at 155 Rue de la Loi to find a Canadian Allied soldier guarding the door. And to his surprise, he recognized a group of neighbors chatting in the lobby of the building. This is a photograph of Rue de la Loi upon his return in 1945. So about half a dozen neighbors safeguarded the family's belongings for the duration of the war by hiding them deep in an underground room of the building. If you remember, I said that I recently discovered that there was an archive of 150 feet of boxes from the same building that were found somewhere deep in the basement, also under as it was being renovated. So eventually he took all of the trunks and suitcases the next day or the day after to the Joint Distribution Committee, which was just behind the Grand Synagogue where he was bar mitzvahed. And a family friend, Paul Enoch, who was one of the directors of the Aid for Jewish Victims of War in Brussels, allowed him to open up all the trunks and suitcases. And when he began to sort through the old clothing and household items, he spotted something hidden between the neatly folded linen. He found his personally monogrammed bar mitzvah stationery, which you see right here. In that, he writes a letter home and he says, if you have a good memory, you will recognize this writing paper. So some of the letters are on Nazi stationery, which he took when he interrogated soldiers. And the one letter out of all of the 700 that has really struck me is the one that's on his bar mitzvah stationery because of what he's described. This letter is dated the 9th of September, 1945. All the letters are in French. I translated them. And this specific one is talking about Rosh Hashanah, and he's wishing his family a happy Rosh Hashanah, the first one after the end of the war. And the only way that he could communicate with his family, besides being a bristly 21-year-old adolescent, was to couch the things that he saw. So if you could possibly imagine how sad the first Rosh Hashanah, the first high holy days were after the war, he writes home on this stationery, but in English for the censors, he says, our new policy is to forget about the past and let bygones be bygones. It's now called the Party of the Good-Hearted and Innocent Sauerkraut-Eating, Jew-Loving German People, the Independent Austrian Branch. When I read this letter, which is many pages long, he describes having gone to visit a concentration camp called Ebensee. And this is going to become very important very shortly. And one of the people in our audience, Judy Zeichner, is going to hopefully help me tell a story. But here he says, to begin with, I want to thank you, my dear mother, for the letter dated on the 28th of August of this year. I just finished my midnight snack, which consisted of bouillon, American Jewish ham, Austrian bread, and German wine. An extraordinary combination, I admit, but excellent. So he goes on, and then he begins to say that he didn't do anything serious that Friday afternoon, which was his half a day free, because Friday was the coveted Rosh Hashanah And he gave a very big party and a dance, and they had a 16-piece American orchestra. All along the way, throughout, he came across refugees, and he knew what his fate would have been had they not escaped. And now one of the most incredible things that he remembered was what was a Hanukkah party that he threw in 1945 that he would remember for the rest of his life. And I'm now, Judy, will you help me tell this part of the story before I go on to tell what happened to the building that they escaped from? Judy Zeichner plays a very important role in this. So first, let's listen to my father.
Did you visit any of the camps or DP camps?
DP camps, quite a few. Concentration camps, I think I saw part of Ebensee. Most of these camps were not even open. I mean, were not open for inspection. They were closed and guarded. You couldn't even get in unless you had a reason. Where I was, there was this Ebensee camp was nearby, and we had some of the survivors. This is a group of prisoners that were freed from concentration camps that we took care of, my intelligence unit.
What was your relationship with the survivors?
A very close relationship. We took great care of them. We made sure they had adequate housing. We made sure they were well fed. And we even had a Hanukkah party for them. We took every possible care of them. And of course, medical care also. That's a picture of a Hanukkah party we gave for the few lucky ones that were saved. In the picture, you see them and maybe a few of us mixed in.
What were your feelings having just narrowly escaped Europe yourself?
Well, you can imagine what my feelings were then. You understand what they're today.
Judy,
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yes.
So this is the most amazing thing, because Judy and I became friends because I was looking for something in one of the boxes, and when I was finishing my research, and a letter from Judy, whose name I couldn't read in her signature, but it took me about 48 hours to figure it out. I just kept matching the letters literally the letters that she wrote that I could read with her signature. And then I looked it up, and I found her on Hanukkah about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, Judy?
Oh, longer than that. It was the best Hanukkah present ever.
Well, you take it away. Can you tell everybody why this is so important and who one of those people is in that photograph?
My father, Jacob Benjamin Hartman, was in Ebensee and survived. And Nina's father, Walter, took care of him and gave him clothes and food and helped him to get past the surviving and getting over the camp. And he held this Hanukkah party for the people that survived, and it was at a place called Schloss Ort in Gumden, Austria. You have to understand the camp Ebensee was in the Austrian Alps. It was on a lake. So every day you were in the camp, you could look at this beautiful area, and it was surreal. And so the Hanukkah party was in a town across the lake at a Schloss Ort, which is a place where now they have weddings and other festivities. It still exists. So thank you, Walter.
Yeah, this was, so Judy presented me with a photograph of my father that her father kept in his special box for the rest of his life. So
Yeah.
It's truly remarkable that we have been put together by some force beyond our control. And it's really, really amazing. If my father were here to see this, he would be absolutely astounded. So
and I just,
now, go ahead.
One thing, Walter, I gave my father this picture. My father saved it for 50 years, and on the back was his address in Manhattan. And I contacted him and developed a relationship with him for years. And then Nina found me. So it's just ongoing.
It's bashert is what it is.
Yeah.
So as I said to you, this blue letter, now I'm going to say that his vivid descriptions of what encompasses what his neighbors did to protect my family's things during that time. This letter is truly unbelievable. The vast amount of information that I found in Brussels not only talks about the people that my father mentioned in this letter, but the archive proves that the Nazis were in this building. And when I went back in October, I met with a chief archivist, and she asked me what I would like to find out of this 150 feet of boxes, a 100-page inventory. And I, not jokingly, but smilingly said, well, obviously I'd love to find a tenant list with my family's name on it. So I was very jet lagged, and she pulled out 3 boxes, had them brought up on a trolley. And just as I was about to look away and go grab a coffee, I found my family's name on a list of tenants who had left the building. There's Wolff. In the letter, the blue letter, my father talks about Mr. and Mrs. Wolfers and about a woman named Madame Jadoul who he couldn't stand. But here we all are on this sheet of paper. It talks about our rent and observations of whether the rent was paid or not. This directly links the neighbors to this particular building. And of the 75,000 to 80,000 Jewish refugees who lived between Brussels and Antwerp before the outbreak of the war in Belgium, only a small percentage returned. Walter Wolff is the only person to ever come forward with empirical evidence of the building's military requisition by the German army, who later returned from exile in the aftermath of the war as a young American intelligence officer who was also one of a very small percentage of surviving German Jewish children who escaped Brussels on the heels of the Nazis. So what I've been sort of holding back on is the fact that that building is now the seat of the European Union and the European Commission. If you look over here at this part of the photograph, this is what's left of the Résidence Palace. From what you saw in the beginning was this huge, huge Las Vegas size building. It has been reconstructed. And when they were building this, which is incredible from the inside, it's called the Lantern, that's where they found the 150 feet of boxes containing the archives from the management of that building. And I'm the only person besides the archivists who made the inventory to have gone through it. And that's why you're the first people to see the photographs that you saw. And on a normal day, all they do in that building is try to prevent genocide and acts of terrorism. So that power of one can change lives. And I can answer this from my own heart and say, and ask, how can we as the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of survivors affect change and do justice to never forget? Well, one way, I believe, is by developing a bridge between Jewish activism for Jewish causes toward activism for global causes. And I'd like to just share a few thoughts with you about our present crisis and how my thinking has evolved throughout more than a decade of research. My father never spoke to me about his experiences as a surviving refugee, but I do have him to thank for leaving such a huge gap in my education so that I could have the privilege of learning and now educating others about World War II and the Holocaust. We can advocate for and affect change in new and impactful ways directed to prevent hatred and racism. Since the start of COVID, there's been a heightening of anti-Semitic behavior and racism and xenophobia and discrimination. By remembering and educating others without diminishing or confusing the memory of those who perished and suffered during the Shoah, we can work against the tide of anti-Semitism and the injustice it has caused throughout our history. By coming together as a global nation, one force, we can stand against the rise in anti-Semitism and the rising tide of hatred, xenophobia, that is caused by, for example, the outbreak of this horrible plague, COVID-19. During this pandemic, the hashtag "We are all in this together" has become the most quoted meme. How? Consider the epidemic of anti-Semitism and xenophobia during the pandemic. We're watching as conspiracy theories abound. For example, pointing to this as an act of germ warfare, a conspiracy created by Jews. There are global leaders pointing to specific groups as the cause of this global pandemic, pointing at times directly at Jews with the old adage that we collectively spread the disease to increase our financial and political power. COVID-19 is not just a public health issue. As a virus, it is exacerbating xenophobia, hate, and exclusion. Here in the United States, recent restrictions by governors in Rhode Island, in Texas, Florida, Maryland, and South Carolina, ordering those arriving from the tri-state area to self-quarantine for at least 14 days to curtail the spread of coronavirus. These states are among those who will join Georgia to open their economies tomorrow. The New Jersey Department of Homeland Security and Preparedness issued an analysis warning that extremists tend to latch onto fears and manipulate crises to validate their ideologies and incite potential attackers. Fernand de Varenne, the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, reported that politicians and groups are exploiting fears surrounding the disease to scapegoat certain communities, leading to a rise in violence against them. Some political leaders have called for migrants to be denied access to medical services. The disease crosses every border between race, religion, and nationality and social status, and it's brought the global economy to its knees. Some states are pushing to open their economies faster than they should, and the open borders of the European Schengen area are challenged and under scrutiny by certain of its member states. This too is a form of hazardous deunification, and that's happening in the building that my father ran away from. According to a recent article in the Jerusalem Post, Fatih Erbakan, President Erdogan's political mentor and the son of former prime minister, was reported to have said in a speech, "Though we do not have certain evidence, this virus serves Zionism's goals of decreasing the number of people and preventing it from increasing. And important research expresses this. Zionism is a 5,000-year-old bacteria that has caused the suffering of people," end quote. The article actually goes on to explain that media too are not exempt from such opinions. A columnist for the daily Yeni Akit, which is an Islamic fundamentalist Turkish daily newspaper. It's one of the top 3 Turkish newspapers featuring hate speech, and an avid supporter of the conservative political party, whose leader has close ties to Erdogan, suggested that a possible Israeli vaccine for coronavirus was part of the plan. Quote, "Look how some people today have rolled up their sleeves to bring the Nazi dream to life. This is a fascist plan," he wrote. Turkey is actually a candidate country wanting to join the European Union. They are a key strategic partner of the EU on issues such as migration, security, counterterrorism, and the economy. In areas of democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights are obviously not their top priority. In India, Prime Minister Modi is fanning the flames of an already tense relationship between Muslims and Hindus by what the Muslim population feels is an effort by Hindu nationalist politicians to prompt the trending topic, Corona Jihad, on social media. It is up to us to sound the alarm with action at our level of society. History is our connective tissue. It binds us to the past. And when I think of that, I think of the tefillin, believe it or not. It acts as our moral compass pointing towards decisions, good and bad, based on how previous generations confronted their circumstances during the seismic shifts in politics and policy towards Jews. Remembrance of the Shoah amongst our fellow Jews cannot stop the rise of anti-Semitic behavior or prevent the spread of any pandemic. But we must act now to educate the next generation to be cognizant of their environment, to act and to react to the signs of hate. Education alone cannot prevent the recruitment of vulnerable minds, but it can provide the critical thinking skills necessary toward the prevention of violent extremism. And finding new corridors for change, new ways to share our values and our collective memory with groups outside our periphery is to engage. And by creating and advocating for an urgent and impactful dialogue, we can develop new solutions to manage hate mongering before times of crisis. And I just, if you don't mind, let my dad have the final word on this whole thing as we remember the Shoah today.
Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
It's a great pity that so few of us lived to tell their story and lived even to smile about it. I mean, I can't help it, but giving some kraut a bottle of oil to drink when he's expecting wine still amuses me. I can't help it, but those are just moments that happened there.
Can you tell me your name, please?
Walter Wolff. Do you have any other questions?
I want to give all of you my sincere thanks for listening to me, and I hope that you have questions. I want to thank Inbar Robbins and Rabbi Dr. Rosenberg, the PJ Library, the Lev Academy at Piranville Jewish Center, and the Jewish Federation of New Jersey for this incredible opportunity to speak with all of you today. It's been truly an honor, and to have the surprise of Judy joining the audience, to be able to really bring this to life, a whole other dimension. It's one thing to have me speak and tell you my memories. It's a whole other thing to have another witness to this who's a greater part of my family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. So if anybody has any questions, I'm going to try to scroll through two sets of screens over here, but you can just raise your hands, or if anybody wants to kick something off, Nina's more than welcome to answer anybody's questions, or if anybody has something that they want to add, feel free. Jake.
Hi, thank you for talking to us today. It's a fascinating story. My question is, how often did your father talk about his experiences during the war, like when you were growing up? Like, was he like very reserved about it, or was he like willing to talk about it a lot?
No, what was amazing was as I started to write this, people came out of the woodwork and they would call me up and they'd say, you know, your father talked to me about this time. And strangely, the only person to have something that was different from the 3 tiny tidbits that my father told me about the chateau is Judy, who said that my father spoke to her about an empty swimming pool at Ebensee that he witnessed at the camp. And I later looked it up after you explained it to me. And you had said that my father told you that he had seen the empty swimming pool filled with uniforms of the dead inmates of the camp. And I was later in touch with the museum at the camp now. And if you go on my website at ninawolff.com, there are about 80 photographs and you'll see unmarked graves. And those graves are at Ebensee and they've since been turned into a monument. Probably you could go on their website and see what they did. But Judy is the only one he actually told something different to, and everybody else had the same tiny tidbits. And I hope this wasn't too disjointed. I've never done a Zoom thing before, so.
We're all in uncharted territory here, so just going along with the flow. No, it actually works really well, minus little glitches here and there, which is internet-based and not anything that we're doing. Anybody else have any questions, any comments? Oh,
is the rabbi still there? I can't see
Rabbi's
anybody.
Still there.
Can you hear?
Rabbi's still there.
Okay. Thank you very much, by the way. I mean, this is a great presentation, very interesting to hear. What I'd like to know is when you turned for that cup of coffee and you got what you were looking for, this needle in a haystack with this letter that had your family on it, what was your feelings when you actually uncovered that, when you realized you found this needle in a haystack?
I blew out of my chair, first of all. I called my family. I couldn't believe it because when I left New York, I said, oh my God. And I had this grant, a small grant. And I thought, oh my God, I found this in 30 minutes. I can't tell anybody I found this in 30 minutes. But you have to picture your messiest drawer and then 150 feet of your messiest drawer of just old sheets. I went one by one by one, and you had to choose boxes. God only knows what was in them. And to see those photographs of the bombed out building, elation that, I mean, we walk by buildings all the time, and the diplomats that go in and out of that building on a daily basis have no idea what happened in that building. And I want that blue letter in that building and to do a show, because there's no more important place than that blue letter belongs than home again.
Inbar, can I answer Jake's question?
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. First of all, excellent presentation. Wish I would have known your father.
Thank you.
He just looks like such a meaningful, kind, intelligent man. Wish I would have known him. Jake, this is the story. My father was in Auschwitz longer than most inmates there. I found that out recently in my research. My mother was in Skaržisko, which was a factory that made bombs for the Nazis. And the people there, if they survived, looked 15, 20 years older than they really were because of the chemicals that were utilized. Also, 2 siblings of mine, my father was married before the war, they were murdered. So that's why I went into Shoah. But I want to share with you why they didn't speak about it, Jake, because they were told when they came to America by the Jews in America not to speak about it. You believe that? They were told not to speak about it. People would think they're insane. And that's the truth. Now, my parents basically just told the same stories over and over and over again. I wish I was smart enough to ask the correct questions. And that's what I say to all who are alive that have parents that are alive. Ask the questions now. I wish I would have. I spend years and years and years in research like you have. And it's very difficult. You paste a little here, a little there. It's impossible. But they didn't start to write books until about the 80s. And people just didn't talk about it. They were told not to talk about it. Do you believe that?
It's amazing because, you know, Rabbi, you're a slightly different generation. I'm going to be 58. And so
I wish I was 58.
But no, it's so interesting to hear the differences in how, you know, people grow up and what their parents talk about. And what they wanted more than anything was to start their lives. My father couldn't wait to go back to school. He couldn't wait to go to Columbia. And he became a famous furniture designer. And so that's what I knew about my father. He was this famous man who was the precursor to IKEA in the United States. And so some families would talk about it, and that would and their PTSD would be imposed upon the children. I know this is a point of contention with you, Rabbi. I know with the DNA and all of that. I saw that yesterday, but there is something. I
have it.
Yeah,
I have PTSD.
Survival skill.
I have
it. Yeah,
some of my kids have it.
It's really fascinating how it goes through the generations.
Let me share something, if I may, because you are a younger generation. Those of us, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for me, because I don't want to generalize with anybody else. Our lives were not easy. My parents loved me. I was an only child. My mother couldn't have any more children after what she went through with the drugs that she was given. I almost died at birth. I have a hole in my head. I really do have a hole in the back of my head. And I have a scar all the way through my neck. But the important thing is that we had a rough life. Some people always talk about, you know, how loving their parents were. My parents were loving, but I got to tell you, the yelling, the screaming, the tension, the stress. I mean, sometimes I would say to my my parents, I can't take this anymore. So I have PTSD, believe me.
It's also interesting that it changes from person to person, because my grandmother and her sister are a year apart. They survived along with one brother, and my grandmother was always very vocal about her story. And from as soon as I was old enough to start elementary school, and I went to Solomon Schechter in New York, it was something that we talked about all the time. So it was not new to me that, you know, my grandmother's family had survived Auschwitz and what had happened to the others. Her sister, who emigrated to Israel afterwards, never spoke about it, not once. It was a very, very long time before her son, who he and my mother are only a few months apart, finally got some information. My grandmother very willingly did the interview for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. Unfortunately, it's in Serbian, so I can't even show it to my kids with them being able to understand it, but we're working on translating it. And it took my mother's cousin a really long time to get his mother to agree to record their story. Thankfully, we were able to do so. And between all of in the younger generations, we're trying to get that translated so that my children will be able to hear it directly from their great
my message, very simply, Inbar, you're one of the few. And Nina, you're one of the few. I find the second, third generation, fourth generation, not all that dedicated to keeping the memory of the Shoah alive. And that's my message. You know, in a few years, all the survivors will be gone. And in a few years, the 2 Gs like me will be gone. If we don't have the 3 Gs, it's all over.
Why it's so important. And I had no idea that I would ever do this. I never knew that I would write a book. I'm a painter. I had no idea that this would happen to me, that my father would hand me a box that would change my life. And it was my best friend who said to me an hour after I received it, that this is your inheritance. And I'm so privileged to have gotten this education, that this little story that I translated 700 letters for my son because it made him laugh and made him feel like grandpa was in the room, that I should wind up on Holocaust Remembrance Day speaking to an audience at the United Nations in French and in English 2 times, and then to do a presentation again on a day like today is, you know, it's a gift from God. Frankly.
I want you to look up the word Gilgul, Gilgul. I want you to look it up.
Oh, Gilgul, yeah.
Yes, look it up. Okay, this is not an accident. Believe me, my dedication to the Shoah is no accident. This is what God wanted me to do. This is what God wants you to do. Look up the word Gilgul. You have the neshama. You have the soul of some of those from the Shoah. I tell you now.
Thank you. Yeah, for those of you who don't remember what it means, it's a concept of reincarnation in Kabbalistic esoteric mysticism. In Hebrew, the word Gilgul means cycle or wheel, and Nishamot is the plural of souls, as you just said. And souls are seen to cycle through lives or incarnations, being attached to different human bodies over time. Well, that's a great compliment. Thank you ever so much.
I just wanted to say, I think I'm not muted, but I don't know.
No, you're not.
We can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I had a kind of a different experience than you guys. My grandmother, she survived Auschwitz. She was there the entire time, about 3.5 to 4 years. She had the number on her arm, and when I was little, my mom was born in the DP camp in Germany, so she came with them when she was 3. And my grandmother used to tell me that that was her phone number because she was too old to remember it. And then and I believed it, obviously. And then when I went to Hebrew school, I found out what it actually was. And when I started questioning her about it, her answer was, "You should never know from that." And she never once talked about it. And my mom...
Who was born in the DP camp?
My mother.
And so this was your grandmother with the numbers?
Yes. She just passed away a few weeks ago.
Yeah, my father had the numbers.
Yeah, my grandmother too.
Can I just say something too? I had an uncle, and he was also interviewed by Spielberg for the Shoah. And he was in 5 different camps with his father and his brother. His mother and his sisters were murdered instantly, but he survived, and they moved him. You name the camp. He was in 5 of them. They moved him a lot. And he had the number on his arm too. And growing up, I used to ask him all the time, because we lived next door to each other, because his wife was my mother's sister. And, you know, he would always wear long sleeve shirts. He would not talk about it. It wasn't until my cousin gave me the video, which I have, and it's in English, or maybe one time we can share that or something.
Absolutely.
That I found out like his whole story. Like, he would not talk to any of us about it. He would just say, I'm sorry, don't ask, I'm not discussing it. And even his kids didn't know that much, but he did sit down and record it all. So he said he did that so that people would know what happened, and he was only comfortable doing it that way. And then when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, like he had passed, and I had a million more questions that I could never ask, because he, again, would not disclose it. But and he also said, he told me that when they were first liberated, they were angry. He said, because he felt he was very fortunate, because he worked in the factories making stuff, And so he would be able to leave the camp every day, him and his brother, to go to the factory to work, and they would give them something to eat, and then he would come back. So when they were bombing and stuff, he was angry at the Americans because he was like, oh, now I'm gonna have to just stay at the camp. They're never gonna let me like work. Like he said, he didn't really even understand what was going on because he just felt this was his way of life now forever, this is what he would have to do. So, you know, that I just found the story was just, it blew my mind. It really did. And, you know, he was like, that's when he was like, it was 5 years. So from the time he was like 14 to 19 years old, he was from Hungary that he did that. And then my grandmother, she was hidden and she escaped. My grandfather had come over first, and he was a scholar in Russia, but here he would press pants. And then finally my grandmother with my aunts and uncles came over on the boat. They had rickets. They would tell me stories. And she said she was a seamstress, so she would have to sew her way through towns so everyone would she would do things for people so they would hide them so she could escape here. And I think she came here in like 1920. So these were really bad, like way before 1940 for Jew. It wasn't just like, it was way before. This was from Russia, Romania, that they kind of saw the writing on the wall. So I just, you know, no one's alive anymore. I don't have any aunts or uncles or grandparents or anything. I have stories that we have videotaped, luckily, and written.
Well, but then that's what you sort of look around around those things at the dates and the things that are mentioned. You know, I had forgotten to say that when I was in Paris in January, right before the outbreak of COVID, I had a chance to go to the Shoah Museum there, and I opened up the collection of letters. They came to New York several years ago, and they scanned the 700 letters, and I opened up the letters in the archive for future study in France and in Belgium, which probably, I mean, they'll be online, so that's a global thing probably. And that there's in Warren County, at Warren County Community College, there is a Holocaust Research Center that opened 2 years ago, and I made the keynote speech there because when I was getting divorced, I had no place for my library. And I donated the 17 boxes of books from my father's library and my research library to them. And there's a plaque up there for someday you'll understand. So the project has had a huge reach. And I encourage everybody to look at what you have, everything, because you may just find, you know, that needle in the haystack and be able to tell a story to your children and grandchildren that you didn't know you could.
I'd like to comment. Oh, go ahead. Just on what the rabbi had said before, in terms of he could kick himself for not asking more questions. And I feel the same way. My grandparents came much earlier. They came around 1902. But I had the same problem. They didn't want to talk about anything about their past for different reasons, but they left family, which they never saw again. And I can imagine what happened to them afterwards. And by the time I really got interested and wanted to ask my grandparents, it was too late. They were gone, and the next generation, they were starting to lose their memory. So I would, and my grandparents were very important to me growing up. And I would encourage younger people to, if they're interested in their family history, to talk to people, talk to their relatives while they can still remember, and they can pass down their family history. It's so important to know your past because it helps you understand yourself. So I enjoyed this whole discussion and presentation very pertinent, and we thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm always so afraid before I do it. It's a little stage fright.
And of course, being in this virtual bubble makes things even more complicated. But we actually managed to get through it. I'm really happy with the way that everything turned out. The technology didn't completely crash on me, so I'm thrilled. I think we have over 60 people on right now with the discussion going on, which I think is absolutely fabulous. As I did with the student program, and I do this for every program that we run, I always love to leave things on a positive note. And one that's full of hope, considering that next week we also have Yom HaZikaron, which PJC is involved with. That would be a memorial day for the fallen soldiers of Israel. Rabbi Shvelowitz, Rabbi Glenn, and I were all involved in a project that will be live streamed through Federation on Monday, April 27th from 7 to 8 p.m. I sent out the links for how you can register for that, and then Federation sends you the actual live stream links. That's not handled by me, but if you're available to join for that. And then we go straight into Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Israeli Independence Day. And so we'll take care of that as well, and the kids have their own thing. But I think it's more important than ever that we have that homeland, a place to home, a place where we are free to be Jews. Having just been to Israel in the fall with Rabbi Shvelowitz and a bunch of people who are on today, I can't tell you the difference in feeling when you walk down a street in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv or anywhere, and nobody's looking at you cross-eyed because you're wearing a chai, or saying Shabbat Shalom to everybody that you cross, and being at the Western Wall on a Shabbat evening and seeing the massive crowds of people all going to celebrate Shabbat together as one was just an absolutely unbelievable feeling, one I don't think I will ever forget. And I hope that one day soon this whole pandemic is gone and we can go back to traveling back to Israel. I know there's been a lot of interest for that, so I'm hoping that one day we can do that again. So Sherry, if you don't mind, can you please do the Hatikva for us? You got to unmute yourself.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Ayin Letzion Dovia Od Lavavta Tikvateinu Atikva B'Shnat Habayim Liot Am Chofshim Be'atzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Liot Am Chofshim Be'atzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.
Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. Thank you, Nina, for an unbelievable story. I am so glad that our paths crossed very randomly on Facebook a couple of years ago. Rabbi Rosenberg for indulging my very last-minute request as I was putting this whole thing together. It's always a pleasure to have you join us. I hope to one day when we're able to open the building, bring Nina back face-to-face. There's so many different aspects of her book and so many different directions we can take all of this that I would love to have her back again. But I just really want to thank all of you for taking your evening out to join us today.
Oh, it's amazing. And I hope you guys will read it too.
Yes, absolutely. I do have a copy. If anybody wants it, I can certainly circulate it around. But this is an incredibly important program for me personally. As I said in the beginning, it's my little piece that I can contribute to my family, to my grandmother, to her legacy, to my children, to see that in our family, we never forget, we say never again, and we mean it. And part of that for me is being able to do this and to educate our students in Hebrew school. And this is why I put so much time and effort into this program every year. So thank you everybody. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of the week. And I'll see a lot of you on Zoom tomorrow night for Shabbat services at 6:20.
Thank you so much for putting this together. And thank you for the presentation.
So much, everybody. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Honor. Bye-bye.